1, 0, and liftoff.
Welcome to Mission Control, Peralta Design's podcast on all things branding and digital marketing. Since 2008, Peralta Design has launched hundreds of brands with award-winning identities and websites. Join our hosts Ramon and Jorge as they use decades of combined experience to tackle topics with past clients, industry partners, and the rest of the PD crew. At Peralta Design, we launch brands. But for now, let's launch right into this episode of Mission Control.
Hey, welcome everybody to Mission Control, Peralta Design's podcast on everything branding, technology, and marketing and entrepreneurship. And I'm your host, Ramon Peralta. I'm the founder and creative director here at Peralta Design, where we launch brands. And I'm super excited to have this special guest with us today. Her entire brand, and we're going to talk about personal branding and entrepreneurship, but her entire brand is about being an authority on urban trauma, the racial disparities in our community, social justice, and she's on a personal mission to combat these narratives through her books, her webinars, her speaking engagements, her organizations. She's a member of Delta Sigma Theta. Those that know, I'm an Alpha, so we have that D9 connection. She's Dominican, so we have that also in common. I'm just really thrilled. She's a colleague, but she's also an inspiration, and I'm so excited to have her on our show. Please welcome Dr. Maysa Akbar. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Ramon. How you doing? Thank you. This is like I feel like I'm home in all kinds of different ways, right?
Yeah.
Life, my Dominican life, all my lives are coming together.
Professional, right. This is what we want. We want congruency, and this is awesome. I'm really, really excited to have you on the show. You recently launched a book. You've launched businesses. We launched brands. You're a client. You're a friend. It just made sense to have you on the show because a lot of our listeners don't know where to begin. They may have these ideas. They want to change the world. They're stuck in jobs where they may not be happy. They've dealt with racism, and we want to kind of touch on all these things and just let's start with you and how you even got into this career. Like, I've read your book. I've got the urban trauma. I know you've experienced some personal things that you've put in the book. But whatever you're comfortable with sharing, tell us about kind of when did you first know that you wanted to make this your life mission, and how did you get into this career?
Yeah. So, now just to kind of give the landscape for your audience, I'm a clinical psychologist. I do my expertise in terms of the work that I do is on race-based trauma. So, clinical psychologists can do many types of different levels of mental health intervention. And for me, that was and has always been my passion. And so I've worked in this field far before it became popular and trendy. Just a few months ago with the culmination of COVID and the, systemic racial unrest throughout the country. So I am in some ways really elated that now this conversation has bubbled to the top. And in some ways, feel like, yeah, it's about time because I've been having this conversation for a really long time, So happy and at the same time, like impatient, like I you got a short runway, let's go, So how did I get here, right? We're talking, I'm going to sort of take a back engineering strategy, right? Starting you from the end and backing into the beginning of this. I grew up I'm the daughter of Dominican immigrants who came to this country like many other immigrants in search of a better life, the land of milk and honey, greater opportunity for our family. My parents saw that there was a possibility for that to happen. And, migration here was the way that they were going to accomplish that. It wasn't that our life in DR was horrible. It was just that they thought it could be better, and they felt that in terms of the images that they were receiving coming into our island nation, that the U.S. could provide that for them, right? And so I don't think that that's much different than a lot of the immigrant stories that you may hear, and And so, the tenet that they brought me up on was that education needed to be my focus, and that I needed to root myself in learning as much as I can, mastering the language without an accent, making sure that I was excelling at all levels in school, and being connected to that level of achievement as an identity for myself, right? And then when I was a teenager, a budding teenager, they made a critical decision that changed the rest of my life. And they decided that really life was too hard for them to survive here. My mother was, the product of, I think, a pretty poor middle class, entering into sort of the middle class in DR, which is, for all intents and purposes, managing like a third world country. And so she didn't have a lot of skill or education. And so she was a factory worker. And my dad really tried to get, little jobs here and there. And life becomes hard when here in the US, when you don't have the talent, the education, the access to opportunity. And my parents didn't really, what they thought was supposed to be this entry into that life, they learned very quickly became a number of barriers, whether it was the language barrier, whether it was opportunity barriers, whether it was coming out of what now they deemed as poverty here, because that's the class that they came into, even though that class was different back in the island. And that's a shock for a lot of people too, because you have a lot of immigrants that actually come with professions, right, and they get here and now they're in the poorer class and trying to.
Did your parents come to New York City, or were you born in DR and you came with them at a certain?
Okay. They spent a couple years in Miami and then migrated to the majority of my family was in New York, and then I grew up in Brooklyn for most of that. And so that life-changing event meant that they decided to go back to DR, and then they chose that I was going to stay here.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that they were not going to take me back with them. And they decided to leave me with family. Again, not very different than some of the immigrant stories that you'll hear, whether that's leaving your children behind to come here, or, mine was reversed. It was
separation, this family separation.
Family separation that happens. And we're seeing that, of course, now significantly with the asylum seekers and the border families. And it's being highlighted more and more. Because now I think we're starting to understand the traumatic experiences that come along with that separation. Before it was determined, that it was sort of commonplace for that to happen. Nobody cared about the trauma. But as a person who was experiencing this growing up, I'm like, this is very much a trauma, and we need to sort of think about it from that lens and try to figure out how we're going to support people.
And so how does that trauma manifest itself later on, where it hinders you, or does it inspire you? Does it make other things more difficult? Is that a piece you're raising awareness to this trauma? Because for many people that don't relate to it or understand it, they just look at the end result. They look at the poverty, they look at the dysfunction, but they're not making a connection to what happened early on in that person's life.
Yeah, I mean, I think what the reason why I'm so fascinated with trauma is because I really do feel that it's, it has many sides to it. You can experience a trauma. In fact, the majority of us, the statistics show that over 70% of us in our lifetime will experience at least one trauma event, right? Now, trauma doesn't mean that you're going to develop a clinical diagnosis of PTSD. It just means that you've been exposed to a trauma, either personally, and to some extent, I think a greater number of people have been exposed to a trauma vicariously, meaning that they've seen a trauma that somebody else has experienced, but it affects them in one way or another. So this started to shape the way that I viewed the world. And what I think is so important about what you're saying is that then there's an opportunity to tap into your resiliency. When you've been a product of a person who has experienced trauma, how do you overcome that trauma? And what is the pathway that you're going to take in order to do that? And that's what I had to contend with at the age of 13. I'm here. This is my trauma. This is my life. This is my experience. What are going to be my choices? Am I going to be a product and a victim of this trauma? or is there a way that I can push past it to overcome obstacles that I didn't even think were possible to overcome?
Right.
That was my script.
Yeah, exactly. And I think another thing you and I have in common is, and we never even discussed this, but this idea of being an outlier, where we're in our communities, and by all statistics, we should not have made it. But somehow we persevered. We were the smart ones in the class. There were people that kind of took us under their wing and guided us, like, you should do this, you should do that. Or we just had this innate fire, and many of us try to figure out, well, how do we replicate that? And so hence why I've made a pact with myself to, if I'm ever asked to speak to young people, to do so, because I've been on that kind of, as a teenager, my life could have gone completely in another direction had I not, just by sheer luck or divine intervention, been saved from that situation. So what is it that you feel like clicked inside of you? Or was it a God moment? Was it somebody that said, hey, Maysa, you're different, come with me? Or did you also encounter that feeling of not fitting in with your peers because, you wanted to pursue higher education or that kind of a thing? Because I think that's something that doesn't get talked about that often.
Yeah, I think all of that, all at the same time.
Yeah.
There were moments where people are like, oh, you're a geek, or what's wrong with you? You come from the streets. Why are you acting? Why are you talking white?
Right.
I'm like, what? I'm not talking white. I'm talking like I talk, So, and I mean, that's even a challenging thought. I had a colleague that I had this conversation with the other day, and I'm like, why is it that when Black and brown children decide to speak in a way that sounds, educated, now they're talking white? What is it about us that we would even suggest that they're not engaging in Black excellence at that point, that instead we are associating that with,
because that's the thing. That's a label we put on ourselves. That's not coming from, external. That's internal.
Exactly.
Like what we're seeing. Right.
We got a lot of stuff we got to do with, right? That's a whole other podcast. We got stuff.
I know. I'm trying to say that we're going to keep this to a half hour, but I think we're going to have you on for several segments. Yeah. There's so much to unpack. But for our entrepreneurs out there, Dominicans are known to like have this crazy hard work ethic. Like we work multiple jobs. Like a lot of people of color have that. Like people say that about the immigrant population. They're the backbone of the country. Whereas there's something, when did you realize like you weren't going to be satisfied being an employee or working for other people? Like what made you feel like you had this higher calling to do your own thing?
Yeah, it's funny, right? Because at the same time that I can demonstrate and show you the trajectory that led to my traumatic experiences in childhood is the same way that I can share those same stories that influence the way that I thought about life. So my dad back in DR was like a serial entrepreneur. He always had some kind of hustle going on all the time. He was like owned some kind of corner gas station, had a little supermarket bodega like on the side with some like plátanos and stuff on the front, and then he was doing some distributing stuff of like rice and stuff into different. I'm like, this man had like 25 businesses.
Now I know where you get it from. So
yeah, now you understand, right? And so I saw that too as an influence, and I saw what he did that was possible. Mm-hmm. And that, in many different ways also influenced the way that I'm like, well, if he did it with such limited capacity, and while he wasn't able to exact that in this country, perhaps now with some of the opportunities that I've been afforded and some of the barriers that have been removed from me or that I have removed for myself, maybe that's something that I can engage in and be successful in, right? So that's why I say that I'm fascinated by trauma, because at the same time that I can tell you that my parents' decision caused me to experience a great deal of trauma is the same way on the same coin that I can tell you that watching them and their work ethic and the role models that they were in terms of pushing past barriers embedded in me to do the same, right? And so that resiliency comes from somewhere, right?
Right,
And I inherited that just as much.
Right. It's that adversity. I think when I speak to young people, I'll often tell them, like, if you think your life's tough now, it's like, it's preparing you. Like, there's so much you've already gone through that's making you stronger. And kids that are coddled and grow up soft, quote unquote, it's like life will eventually, teach them a lesson. And we're not doing kids a favor, I guess, by coddling them too much. But there is something to be said for those kids that have grown up. Like, I was a latchkey kid, I walked to school, elementary school, walked to school, worked after school. But I think all those experiences, while they exposed me to some things that probably weren't ideal, I think that they did make me more resilient as a person. And so there's some valor there to give kids a sense of, like, this isn't like your life's not all negative and this isn't all bad, and kind of switch that why me, poor me into like, well, if I got through that, I can do anything, and give them a sense of empowerment instead.
Yeah. I love that. I always say to them, your life situation is not your destination.
Right.
Like, you still got a whole way to go. Like, this could be your life now. And when you determine and you envision yourself in a different place, and you can see yourself, being your own boss, or being an entrepreneur, or innovating, or starting something new, or being the president of the United States, whatever you want. Right. If you envision yourself there, there's nothing that can stop you from pursuing that, right? And to answer your question, that's why entrepreneurship made sense to me. I didn't know how to do it. I didn't go to school for it. I went to school to be a psychologist, but I knew that it was possible. And I saw an opportunity for me to offer something different in the landscape of mental health, and to offer just beyond the traditional, office visit and the traditional systems of therapy that were anchored, in white standardization groups, to say there's an opportunity here for me to treat a community of people based on their life experience, on their perspective, with a person who understands their trauma, because I've been there, right? And that's why I wanted to build my own business, Integrated Wellness Group, because that's what it provides. And that's what it provides expertise in that area.
And did you spend much time working at a traditional clinic, or did you come right out of school and start your own thing?
No, I did spend time working at a traditional clinic. My career takes about 11 to 12 years to finish. So I was already way into working in many different systems beforehand. And then I worked at Yale for a while under multiple different, grants, because of the way that it works when you're a researcher and an academic. It's a little bit different. And then I worked for a community clinic for several years. And I saw that there was a disparity between the type of treatment and resources that were given to families who went to Yale, that had a top-notch, cutting-edge clinic, versus the type of treatment and services that were given in a federally qualified health clinic. And I said, all right, there needs to be an opportunity for something in between. This is about, right? This is how entrepreneurs, for those in your audience, can think, right? I saw the seam. I saw the opportunity. And I said, well, if not now, then when? Right. If not who, then it has to be me.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of like, I remember I injured myself some years ago on a motorcycle, and I went to a walk-in, and I couldn't even, they gave me an ACE bandage and a cane, and I couldn't walk, and then I said, well, I have insurance. Let me go to an orthopedic surgeon, and they gave me a boot, and then I was able to walk. It was like the difference in care from when it's clinical or urban or low income versus, like, there's a big disparity in medical care. I can imagine you saw that in your area of expertise. Now, for those out there, you obviously are well credentialed from a professional standpoint in your area, but from a business standpoint, did you take business classes, or did you just naturally business savvy and just kind of picked it up, or like how do you explain that?
That's a great question. I did not take any business classes. In fact, although, like I said, I was a 12-year student, right? there was not one time that a business class was offered in my track and in my field. But the interesting dichotomy to that is that many of us start private practices. So you start a business, but are never trained on how to run a business. You're never, right? You don't know what an AR and AP look like.
Nope.
You don't know how to create budgets. You don't know how to create a business plan. You have no idea how you're going to get funding to start your business, to float your business. You have no idea to look at trends in terms of the cyclical cycle of when, revenue is high versus revenue being low, net profit, no idea, right? I was clueless. I was like, that sounds like fun. I think I can do this.
So that's the part where we're all a little bit crazy because you just went for it.
And I was like, I think I can do this. And then I was like, holy cow, what was I thinking? Yeah. So then I actually did it the reverse, through, we're both members of the Greater New England Minority Supply Development Council. I became an MBE. And then through that process, I remember meeting Dr. Fred McKinney, and he was like, girl, you need to take some classes. And so Dr. Fred then supported me in getting a scholarship at Tuck and at Northwestern and, the Kellogg School. And I did several series of business courses. And so my runway was very quick in terms of having to develop business acumen because I had no idea what I was doing. And I feel that because I didn't, and that is a disservice, I think, that many fields don't consider as they're prepared. If you're in the legal field and you're starting your own law firm, do you learn about business? It's a disservice because then you go out into the world and then you have to make the mistakes. And there's no reason for us to be in that place and for people to have to be doing that now.
Right. I think
there's so many.
I think the antiquated system is they're preparing you for a job. They're preparing you for employment, not for entrepreneurship and not so you're learning your skills. And Dr. Fred, that's a great shout out. He's a mentor and he's looked out for me and we share that as well. I attended the Tuck program on 2 occasions and again, it definitely paid dividends to understand P&L statements and all that fun stuff that comes along with the fact that you need to know your cost per hour sold, before you can hire people and do payroll. So great stuff. I want to kind of fast forward a little bit. I'm really intrigued by the work you're doing at the United Nations, and if you want to tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll go into the books and the most recent book. And then we'll tell people how they can get it. So how did you get this opportunity and what's that like being there?
Sure. So the American Psychological Association, which is the governing body for psychologists nationwide, selects 7 representatives of the APA to sit at the United Nations. And part of our jobs is to sit with the different missions, which are member states that are part of the UN, and to inform the conversation around psychology and mental health. And oftentimes you have missions or member states that are making decisions about, mental health, whether that is through providing universal health insurance or mental health to people in their communities and in their countries, whether that's around an initiative because of something that's happening in their particular country. But they don't know exactly the language or the technical capacity. They don't have the technical capacity to implement those programs correctly. And so we sit in different meetings. Some of them are about child rights. Some of them are about eradicating poverty, world poverty. Some of them are about women's rights. And in those committees, we are the ones that are giving a voice to psychology and to thinking about implementation of these programs based on a psychological point of view. Because what people don't understand in terms of the uniqueness of psychology is that we are the ultimate holders of studying human behavior. So no matter how you slice it, it doesn't matter what industry you're coming from. It doesn't matter if you're talking about AI all the way to like, you know, the
humans are going to human.
Humans are humans. And if you want to resolve a human issue, then psychologists are going to help you how to do, you know, help you to do that. And so I think that there was an opportunity that the United Nations had in combination with APA, and they selected a group of us to be deployed to do this. The appointment is for 7 years. And so it's really exciting to be at not just the cutting edge of this work, but to be working internationally with so many different countries and so many different ambassadors who have a deep and profound passion around looking at psychology in a really different way for their countries.
And that's excellent. Has it been affected with COVID? Are you doing those meetings virtually, or are you still going into the city?
Yeah, I'm not going into the city. The UN has essentially shut down at this point, and it did very early on. So most of the programming has been done virtually, including our major event, which is the Psychology Day. We actually ended up doing that all virtually in May. And there were, I think, about 200 countries, states and townships and psychologists and thousands of psychologists represented in that. What the virtual platforms allow you to do is that it connects the world. And so people who wouldn't have been able to physically attend Psychology Day in the United Nations were able to do that because now it was all virtual.
Yeah, excellent. Before I go to the book, I had a question I want to ask you that I think entrepreneurs will find interesting. At some point, you had to go from the solo practitioner to having a team, and what's been your biggest challenge scaling or going from solo to hiring directors and having staff and growing your business? How long did it take, first of all, to get to where you are now, and what's been your biggest challenge?
I think that the biggest challenge is always managing people. And, to me, I know how to do the work. But it's having to do the work. You know that when you're an entrepreneur, especially depending on where you are, in terms of the different revenue spectrums, sometimes you do everything. And so you are the rainmaker, you're the salesperson, you're the one that, you're HR, right? And HR can take up a lot of your time, Meanwhile, you need to be out there doing sales calls and closing deals, right? And you're still dealing with this one HR issue that hasn't gone away for 3 weeks. So to me, that's the biggest challenge, right? Is being able to make sure that you are consistently growing your business and being innovative and being relevant. And at the same time, then having to manage the human capital. And that's a really tough, I think, tough thing to accomplish when you don't have the scalability of having a person to manage the HR, and also to do the marketing. And also to do, all of these different areas of your business that need to be done in order for you to be a marketable and sustainable business. So that it's not being able to clone myself, 6 different ways to the sun, because,
have you had to fire yourself from a particular job you were doing because you had to, because you were an entrepreneur, but you realized that you weren't good at it or you didn't like it? Is there something that you can share about that?
Totally. Yeah. I can tell you, I fired myself from anything operations related. And I keep firing myself. Right. And my director that I have there, she fires me all the time too. Like, she's like, could you stay out my lane, please?
Right.
You and your vision and your, this and your that and your 10,000 projects. I ain't got nothing. What I'm going to tell you is you don't got the money to do that. What I'm going to tell you is that sounds great. Write it down and let's talk about it. That is so great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Because we all, in the beginning, we want to do it all. And then you have to hire people smarter than you that are better at these things that you're not good at. And then you have to get out of their way. Right.
Yes.
Yes. So that's great. Let's jump fast forward to your latest book. We talked a little bit about urban trauma. Now you've written multiple books. Is there something you learned from the first one that helped you write the second one? I noticed the second one has a different format. You can kind of flip it open to any section and read. It's like little vignettes.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about why you chose to go a different route with the formatting of the second book?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, for me, what makes sense is that this has been a continuum of this work for me. And a lot of people have asked me that question because the way that they see it is that talking about racial trauma is not inclusive of having a conversation about allyship.
Mm-hmm.
And I beg to differ in that perspective. I think talking about racial trauma has everything to do with talking about allyship. Because if we think about race as a construct that was created to oppress one group of people and to benefit another group of people, then we need those that have been benefiting from the construct of race for centuries to take ownership over the fact that they're benefactors of it. And with that ownership comes responsibility to dismantle those very same systems, right? And so it is a very clear line for
And
me.
why would they want to if they're benefiting from it, right? It's going to be a challenge.
I think that there are going to be many and some or the few, who may not want to, depending on what your walk of life and your worldview is. And then I think that there's going to be a few, and those that are really strong proponents of racial equity that will say, I'm in it 100%. I also think that with us being in the situation that we're in for 2020, who has been extremely unforgiving, and has dealt multiple things, you want to deal with COVID and now stay in place and having to watch the world as things are happening, seeing the bubbling up of the racial injustice that has been going on for a really long time, but nobody had the time to pay attention and nobody could sit still long enough to say, this is a problem. Mm-hmm. We are at a tipping point. We are at a point where I think the world is starting to see this, at minimum, this country is starting to see this very differently. We're entering into, a political campaigning season, and it's getting stronger and stronger in terms of decision making around that. We're being more woke around this. You and I before this had the conversation about Goya, and different people are making different decisions. And by showing you who they are, we need to believe them. But if you show me that you're prepared and ready to be an ally and that you want to partner with me to fight against this thing, then let's do it together. Mm-hmm. And that's who this book is for. Mm-hmm. If you're the kind of person that believes that your privilege continues to benefit you and you're not willing to give it up, then I'm not sure that this is the right read, But if you're in a position that you say enough is enough, and this has gone on too long, and I'm ready to make a difference because I'm a teacher that works in an urban school district, because I'm a correctional officer that has seen too many Black and brown men come through the doors of these buildings, because I'm a legislator that is fighting for police accountability, because I'm a caseworker that is tired of having to triage endless cases of trauma, and you're saying it's enough, and you've chosen to work in these fields to make a difference, then be an ally and learn how to do it and learn how to do it right.
Right. I think that's the key thing, is doing it right, because people want to help, but you run the risk of being condescending or not being sincere or maybe capitalizing off a movement. I do feel that the George Floyd video profoundly affected people that were kind of blind to the whole Black Lives Matter movement in general, didn't understand it or thought it was about football or, it just, the messaging just got lost and twisted. It became about patriotism and less about police brutality. But I think you can't deny those 8 minutes and 46 seconds from the effect that it's had. And so your book is super relevant and timely, and I hope people get it. And what would be the best way for them to find it and purchase it?
Yeah, I'm encouraging that if you can purchase it from a Black or brown owned bookstore, it allows you not only to get the material, me not only to be able to give you that material, but then we're also supporting Black and brown businesses. And that's what we're all about. You and I talk about this all the time, who we choose to be our vendors, and unequivocally, that's what my mission is, to make sure that I continue the supply chain into minority-owned businesses. So I would like to do that with this book just the same. If you're unable to get it from a BIPOC bookstore, then of course it's available on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, and all the other platforms. But part of your initial commitment to this, to allyship, is to say, well, you know what? I'm also going to support a Black-owned, Brown-owned business. So if you could do it that way, that would be the greatest way to do it. And if they don't have it, they can purchase it, because they can go on and talk to our publishing company, and we'll funnel those books over to that bookstore.
Okay, excellent. And do you do trainings, or can a corporation hire you to talk about race relations within companies? And can you speak a little bit about that and how somebody might hire you to do that?
Absolutely. So I do, all types of trainings, in terms of the context, the full context of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I am looking for, and I work solely and specifically for those that are looking to manage real digestive change within their organizations. So this is not sort of like DEI as an adjunct, like I'm going to have it there. It's a really nice to have. These are really for organizations that are prepared, that they've made those statements during George Floyd, and now they're willing to live by those statements and say, we need to make a change. And so I do anything from an equity audit to see how, is your organization racially equitable, to trainings around unconscious implicit bias, to how to integrate those trainings into the fabric of the organization, to individual coaching and support on making sure that we're moving strategically in a direction to create an equitable workforce. Excellent.
You're amazing. You're doing some amazing work. For those folks out there, Maysa Akbar, MAYSAAKBAR.com. And you can also follow her, right? You're on LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter, Instagram. Do yourself a favor and just get on board with this. You're truly doing amazing things. It's been a pleasure to have you here. We're going to have you back, because there's so much more that we didn't even get to. But you're doing some amazing work. Congratulations on your new book.
Thank you.
We're super excited to list you as a client, and we're excited about the projects that we're working with you on to take you to that next level and launch your brand. So thanks for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for listening to this episode of Mission Control. Until next time, this is Ramon Peralta from Peralta Design, and we launch brands.
Thank you for taking this journey with us. To learn more about Peralta Design and our work, go to www.peraltadesign.com and subscribe to keep up with the crew.